Last week I spoke about the hidden story of Yaakov and Esav, which is a fascinating look at how the Torah certainly should be learned. And we begin to see that when you learn the Torah that way, which means the hidden or the covert story, it answers many questions, and I'm trying to show as an example, how one can learn the Torah using the story of Yaakov and Esav. So I wish to continue that approach to give you an incredible understanding and appreciation of how deep the Torah is, because it expresses a whole different story at a different level using the exact same verses, or psukim, which is astounding. Anyway, before I begin, this year should be a merit for the health and success of the families of Regina Bas Yosef Reuven and Yeshaya ben Yisrael, Benjamin Wolf, ben Tzvi Hersh, and Baruch ben Benjamin Wolf. Okay, so last week I had ended, why did Yitzchak love Esav? In fact, the Torah says that. For Yitzchak Ohev, and he loved Esav. And the answer is not because he especially, had a preference for Esav, but the Zohar says that, a like loves its kind. You see? So we know that the Avodah, the work of Yitzchak, was Gevura, right? Was Gevura. And the job of Esav, right, being one half of Tferes, which if you remember was the left side, that was Gevura, strength or might. And the job of Esav was to subdue the Satan, as I mentioned. His neshama was tied to the Satan, right? And that's why he had this incredible tendency of sinning, because that's what he was supposed to do. Not sin, but destroy the Satan by not sinning. In other words, withholding the temptation and not sinning. And then he would have depleted the Satan of all the holiness that the Satan gathers from the sins. In any case, so therefore Yitzchak loved Esav, because Esav was just like, right, his job was just like the job of Yitzchak. Except the job of Yitzchak was might in terms of building himself. Not that he has to go out and subdue evil, but he has to subdue evil in himself, the Gevura. You see, like it says in the Pirkei Avos, Ezer Gibor, who is considered a strong man, HaKovish es Yitzroi, somebody who subdues, prevails over his Yetzer Hara. That's internal, right? So that was Yitzchak's job, to work on himself, not to go out. That was Avram. And Esav, of course, was an Ishadeh. He went out, because he had to go out into the world and subdue evil. How? By not falling into evil, even though it had such a tremendous Yetzer Hara on him, as we see. Therefore, Yitzchak loved Esav. You see? Same job, or very similar jobs. Right? Okay, so that is why Yitzchak loved Esav, and so on. Not that he didn't love Yaakov, of course he did. But, as they say, birds of a feather flock together because they're the same. So they have this commonality, camaraderie, and so on. So they tend to flock together with birds of the same kind. Anyway, we now come to the sale. The sale by Esav of his firstborn status to Yaakov Avinu. Now, it's very difficult to understand. Why? I mean, we know the story, I'm not really repeating the story, but, where Esav came from the field, and he's wiped, right? And he says to Yaakov, I'm really tired, and I see that you're making a dish of lentils, red lentils. Please give me the lentils. I'm starving, you see? So Yaakov says, okay, I'll give you the lentil soup, whatever it was, the bowl of lentils, right? On one condition. You sell me your firstborn status. That's what he tells Esav. So Esav does that. He says, okay, I sell you my firstborn status, right? And Yaakov gives him the bowl, and Esav eats it. Fine. Now people wonder at this and say, what's going on here? How could a brother do this to another brother? What is this? Everything is money? Of course, the anti-Semites point to this. And they say, well, they're the Jews again. It's all about money, cash, right? That's what they say. But of course that's absurd. So the question is, why did he? Why did he sell? Or rather, why did he give lentils for Esav's birthright? That was a sale. Why? Doesn't a brother love a brother? Where the brother would say, Yaakov would say to Esav, of course, if you want the lentils, of course I'll give you the lentils. You see? Because brothers loves a brother. This question is elementary. Any kid should come up with this question. Got it? So that's a very, very difficult question to answer. In other words, what the question really is what in the world is going on here? So there's certain ideas you need to know. And you will see how profound this sale was, how necessary it was. In fact, if Yaakov did not sell, or rather give the lentils for the bowl, the lentils for the birthright of Esav, he could have destroyed the world. Esav would have destroyed the world. Now you look at me and say, what? What in the world does that mean? Okay, first of all, why was he making these lentils? Because Avram Avinu died. He had died that week, and Yitzchak was sitting Shiva. And the minhag is, the tradition is that, if somebody's sitting Shiva, so you make food for the mourner. And he was making lentils for Yitzchak, his father. Like I said, because Avram Avinu died. And by the way, they were both 15 years old at that point. Remember, they were twins. And they had just turned 15. So therefore, that's what happened that week. You see? So Esav comes from the field, and the Mendel says, having committed 5 grievous sins. Yeah, that's who Esav was, if I remember from last year, right? That Esav was an Ov, but he went out and committed 5 terrible sins. One of them, which was to kill Nimrod. Right, he killed them. Other things is where he took men's wives, right, and he wanted to relate with them. He did a whole bunch of things, really bad stuff. And that's why he came back. He was tired from committing all those sins, you see. And this was in the week that Avram Avinu died, you see. So anyway, Yaakov was preparing those lentils, you see. So Esav is tired, and he said, let me have the lentils. So Yaakov realized this, and this is very important. Remember who Esav was. Esav was a patriarch. The soul of a patriarch is enormous. If a patriarch does a mitzvah, he brings down an incredible amount of divine energy, divine light, if he does a mitzvah. If he sins, right, he gives an enormous amount of that to the Satan, because he has an incredible neshama, right? The greater the neshama, the greater is the power over good or the power of evil, you see. Now, Esav is an Ov, right? So could you imagine having committed 5 sins like that, right? Could you imagine the amount of Yenika, which is nourishment, that the Satan had because of the sins of an Ov? He's not some regular guy. He's got the soul of a patriarch, you see. So could you imagine what Yaakov Avinu feels? That Esav, if he keeps sinning, because he has the power of tikkun, rectification, he also has the power of kilkul, right? Damage. So what Esav was doing was damaging the creation by an Ov sinning. I mean, we don't realize what that means, but that's basically what it is. Here's Esav that has the power of kilkul, damage, because he's an Ov. So if Esav damages because he sins, Could you imagine the destruction of the Bria, of the creation, and how much energy he gives to the Satan? Terrible. So Yaakov realized something which is very important. He said, listen, Esav is going to destroy us because he's that powerful. He's not a mere guy. No, he's an Ov, you see. Therefore, Yaakov said to himself, I must take away the ability of Esav to sin. How? Now, what is the birthright status? In every family, in our families, the Kohen has the status of the priest. But before the Kohanim, got it, and it was supposed to be the Bechorim, the firstborn. They had the status of being the high priest of that family. It means the spiritual, trajectory of the mitzvahs, spirituality, was the firstborn. That was until the golden calf. Therefore, Esav is the firstborn. So the spiritual direction of the family, of the children, is Esav's job, you see. So that's a very important idea, which gives Esav even greater power to damage creation, because he's the firstborn. So Yaakov Avinu realized, wow, I have to get rid of the ability of Esav to do the tikkun, right? Now we can begin to understand what Yaakov was going through, right? And Yaakov realized this guy is an unbelievable sinner. And we could see that from two different proofs. One, Yaakov says a very strange statement. He says, right? He says to Esav that I wanted to give you that, right, for money. This is what Yaakov Avinu says, because he wants Esav to sell it. He doesn't want to give Esav the lentils for free. No, he wants Esav to sell his firstborn rights. So Esav would lose the ability to do tikkun. That's why he wanted to buy it, because he wanted it to be a sale, you see. So Yaakov Avinu makes a statement, very strange. He says, Michro, look in the Chumash, Michro, sell me, kayoim, as this day, as bechiros choli, your firstborn status to me. Now, it should have said, please sell me your birthright status. What does it mean, sell me as today, kayoim, as today, your birthright status? What is that supposed to mean? But here's we see where the Torah, in one word, describes the whole event. Because why did Yaakov want to buy the firstborn status of Esav? To take away his ability to do the tikkun, in order to save the planet. Because an oath can destroy the planet. That's how great his neshama is, you see. Especially when we begin to realize that the job of Esav is the forerunner of Mashiach ben Yosef, whose job is to conquer evil and destroy it. So Esav actually has the job as a forerunner of Mashiach ben Yosef. I mean, what are we looking at here, right? So Yaakov says, I'm going to reveal. The Torah reveals his motive, because Yaakov says, sell me today. What do you mean, sell me today? It should just say, sell me your firstborn status to me. Fine. So what does it mean, sell me today? Obviously it's today. And the answer is because today, Yitzchak was sitting Shiva to Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu died, right, that week. The question is why? Avraham Avinu was supposed to live to 180 years, just like Yitzchak. Instead, he lived to 175 years. 5 years were denied Avraham Avinu. Why? Because God said to Avram, you will die b'seva, in a good old age, which means that you will not see tzaras. So therefore, if that day was when Esav went public with his sins. So if Avraham Avinu would have lived then and another 5 years, right, that he would have seen the terrible life that Esav was doing. That would have caused Avraham Avinu unbelievable pain to see his grandson, right, sinning and destroying creation. So what God did is he spared Avram Avinu that sight. And he says, I will take him 5 years before he was supposed to die, instead of 180, 175, so he does not see the evil of Esav and be incredibly grieved, because that's what would have happened to Avram. Because it's not just that grandson sins, it's the power of Esav to destroy the Bria, you see. So therefore God took Avram Avinu 5 years earlier than he should have lived. He should have lived to 180, you see. Now think about this. Every day in the life of an Ov is spectacular. It's unbelievable what he brings down, the unbelievable divine light and energy, the Kedusha is unbelievable. Every day, because every day he worships and serves God. So could you imagine the damage that Esav did because God had to take Avram Avinu 5 years earlier? That means this creation was denied 5 years of unbelievable avodah, the job, the spiritual job of Avram Avinu. And that's what Yaakov was saying. You see, sell me this day, because this day, when you sinned, we see why God took Avram Avinu, and therefore denied creation an unbelievable tikkun, because of the work, the spiritual labor of Avram Avinu. So the Torah reveals in one word, it's astounding, the whole motive of why Yaakov had to acquire the birthright of Esav. So Esav cannot destroy creation. Isn't that astounding? In one word. Now we may say, wait a minute, where do we see that Esav was such a rasha? I mean, the Medrash is the Medrash, fine. But where do you see that in the Chumash? How does God reveal to us the unbelievable sinning of Esav? And the answer is from the last word in the pasuk, right? And it says that Esav ate, right? He sat down, he ate, and so on. And then it says, and Esav despised the firstborn status. Wow, what does that mean? Because like I said, the firstborn status is an incredible holy task. And what does it say about Esav? That he despised it. What kind of gaiva, arrogance, hubris is that? So we automatically see the evil of Esav, that he actually despised the spiritual task of the firstborn. He wanted Olam Hazeh. I want this world. I'm not interested in spirituality or bringing God closer, right? So the Torah actually reveals the evil of Esav and why Yaakov said why he wanted to sail. You see? And that's why he wanted to sail. Not because he wanted to make money on Esav. Of course not. It's absurd. To my Yaakov Avinu. But Yaakov had to save the world. So by buying the first right, the birthright of Esav, which Esav sold him willingly, Esav no longer had the ability to do the tikkun. It's astonishing, isn't it? He took away the ability of Esav to do the tikkun by selling the birthright, and now the tikkun will only belong to Yaakov. So in a sense, Yaakov saved the entire world. Isn't that amazing? That's the story of what's going on in the sale of that birthright. It's amazing that people learn this over and over. They have no concept of what's really being said, because the Torah reveals the true, incident in 1 or 2 words. It's amazing what the Torah does. You see, the Torah is very frugal, you see, with its ability to reveal the true meaning, you see. But this is really what happened. Very interesting concept. Oh, there you are. So therefore the Satan can no longer take from the holiness that the Ov brings down, because Esav no longer has the ability of tikkun. So this is really what happened, you see, because of the damage. So the kilkul, that damage that Esav did, right, is the death of Avram Avinu for 5 years earlier, you see. And therefore, he did that, you see. Okay, that's the story of the sale of the birthright. Now, The next portion we enter is the blessings that Yitzchak gave, right, to what he wanted to do was give it to Esav, right? So he tells Esav, okay, I want you to get me, great dinner, whatever, because many times a person's blessing depends on, guess what? Food, right? Because it's not the food or the materialism that the tzaddik wants, but when you eat food, it does something to your physiology, right? So you feel good. And because you feel good, you have the enthusiasm, the strength to give a person a blessing. Anyway, so he wanted Esav to do that and give him the blessing. Now, what does that mean? What do you mean give Esav the blessing? If you give Esav the blessing, guess what? He will destroy creation. Now, he did not know of the sale. He did not know of that sale. You see, only Yaakov and Esav knew of that. Now, Esav did sin. Yitzchak knew that, right? So why would he give these blessings? And we will talk about what the blessings really were to Esav. Because Yitzchak knew what Esav really was, not that what he was, a sinner, but he knew he sinned from time to time. Why? Because he knows what Esav's job is. Esav's job is an incredible struggle. Remember what I said last week? The Paneach Raza said that had Esav done his job, he would have been twice as great as Yaakov Avinu. Do you imagine that? How great he was? Why? Because you have any idea what it is to have a monumental Yetzer Hara and to struggle with that and to win? It's hard to believe how he even survived at all. You see. So therefore Yitzchak knows that Esav has to struggle and that he will sin at times. But he didn't know that Esav abandoned the whole concept of spirituality. He didn't know that. You see, a second idea was to give the blessings to Esav, right? And that would be mechazek. That would strengthen Esav to continue doing the job because he now has the blessings of Yitzchak. Now the question is, what is the blessings really all about? So what Yitzchak wanted to do is to permanently give Esav the job of the forerunner of Mashiach ben Yosef. Right, that's what he wanted. Because if you look at those blessings, they're all material. You shall conquer other nations, you shall be over them, and they shall serve you. These are not spiritual blessings. They are blessings given to a forerunner of Mashiach ben Yosef, that he will do his job, subdue evil, right, and bring an incredible tikkun to the world. Because remember, Esav has the job of Mashiach ben Yosef, the forerunner, the same job, which is called Kfiyah Surah, right, to subdue evil and destroy it. So he wanted to give. He didn't know that Esav already had given away. So before he would die, he wanted to give Esav the permanence of the job of Mashiach ben Yosef, which is to fight and contend with evil, which I said last week was Kfiyas Hora, right, to subdue evil. You see, and therefore, if you look at the blessings that Yitzchak gave ultimately to Yaakov, they're all material. They are material success, which is what Mashiach ben Yosef has to have to be able to subdue evil. You see? Now, God, of course, knows what happened, and he realized that Yitzchak doesn't really know the extent of the evil of Esav. So therefore, what God did is he blinded Yitzchak, because we know, the Torah says, that the eyes of Yitzchak became dim, which means he basically became blind, or whatever. So Yitzchak therefore would not see who's standing in front of him. Look, all of this was ordained, you see, that Esav cannot have the permanence of Mashiach ben Yosef. He'll destroy the creation, right? So what happens? Esav returns, right? Now, of course, we know Yaakov comes in, right? He's taking a terrible risk because Yitzchak is not aware of this, you see. So it comes out that Yaakov is fooling Yitzchak. He's deceiving him. But it's not just he's deceiving him, right? He's actually taking blessings which are intended for Esav. He's stealing them. You see, Now, why would Yaakov do that? Because he knows that if Yitzchak winds up blessing Esav, the creation is over. Because Esav is going to, again, have the power of tikkun, and therefore the power of kilkul, damage. He's going to wipe out creation, severely damage it. So Yaakov, of course, agreed that he has to take it, you see. So instead of telling Yitzchak, and that would have involved a lot of problems, because Yitzchak loved Esav and so on. So he decides to agree with Rivka and to hide that, you see, from Yitzchak. So it comes out that Yaakov comes in and Yitzchak gives him the blessings, which we know, right? Fine. Then what happens? Esav comes back, right? And he stands in front of Yitzchak and says, okay, do you have a blessing for me? All right. So Yitzchak says, what do you mean for you? Who are you? I already gave them. Because he thought he gave it to Esav. He says, what do you mean who I am? I am your firstborn, Esav. And then the Torah says something which is amazing. Again, the hidden terminology of the Torah. What happened when Yitzchak heard that he made the wrong choice, that he gave it to Yaakov, and Esav is sitting in front of him? You see, what happened? Because he realized something which was terribly frightening. In fact, that it says, "Vayechrad Yitzchak charod gedoilo ad mi'od," that Yitzchak trembled, an unbelievable trembling. Now, we look at this and say, wait a minute. He just realized that Esav fooled him. So what should have been his emotion? His emotion should have been incredible rage. I was just made to look like a fool by Yaakov, right? Yaakov Avinu, right? And he should have been enraged at Yaakov. Instead, he was not enraged. He was unbelievably frightened. Vayechrad Yitzchak charod gedoilo, and Yitzchak trembled with an incredible, exceedingly great pachad, fear. Why? Because he realized that had he given, then all of a sudden he realized that had he given the inyan of Mashiach ben Yosef to Esav, right, and that since God orchestrated all of this, it had to mean, and God did not tell him, because Yitzchak had incredible Ruach HaKodesh, or Nevuah. The fact that God did not tell him this meant that God did not want Esav, which meant that Esav wasn't a sinner. He was an unbelievable Rasha, evil. So he realized that if I had given this to Esav, he would have the power of tikkun, and therefore the power of kilkul, damage. Who knows what damage he could have done, you see? So he was not enraged. He thanked God for saving him. And he realized the damage that he almost did, Yitzchak almost did, and he had this unbelievable pachad neuro, trembling. Could you imagine if you do an act, right, and you realize after you did the act that you just stopped the Mashiach from coming, you, single-handedly, what would you feel like? I mean, you'd be crushed, but you would have tremendous amount of fear, because you realize that you just damaged creation by now allowing the Mashiach to come. Well, that is exactly what Yitzchak felt. And the Torah says this, alludes to this, with saying, and Yitzchak felt unbelievable fear and trembling. It's amazing how the Torah does this, where it reveals the essence of the story in one phrase. It's incredible. Anyway, now what do we have? So we have Esav standing in front of Yitzchak, crying. So he says to his father, maybe you have something left for me? You see? What was Esav's problem? Was it because of the fact that he was made to be a fool, that Yaakov stole the brachas in order to save the creation? Right? He should have been enraged at Yaakov, which later he was. And that's why he said, I want to kill the guy after my father dies. But it says that he cried. Why? It's a very important idea. Because Yitzchak not only wanted the material blessings, no, he loved his father. And he wanted his father to bless him. I mean, what do you do when you love somebody, right? You want to take something which they will give you and cherish it. That's one of the reasons why he wanted the blessing. And that's why, instead of being enraged, he cried. He cried. And that mitzvah, and that was a mitzvah, because he demonstrated an incredible mitzvah of kibbud av v'aim by loving his father and wanting his blessing. So that's tremendously mechabed, honors his father. You see, that mitzvah that Esav did, which I said last week, he was incredible in kibbud av. That presented tremendous amount of difficulties from who? To Yaakov Avinu. Because he always had to contend the unbelievable kibbud av v'aim, honor your father, mother, of Esav to Yitzchak, as we will see. You see. So now Esav is crying, right? And what do you think, and Yitzchak now understands the truth, who Esav really is, you see. So what does Yitzchak do? And this is in many ways amazing. I mean, Yitzchak felt terrible, not only because his son was a sinner, right, and that his son did not have the blessing. What Yitzchak felt is terrible. My son has no part in the tikkun process. You have any idea what that is to an Av? The tikkun process is everything. There is no life without being involved in the tikkun process. People don't understand, because it's not only rectifying creation, it's allowing God to be honored, to reveal the heavenly majesty. You see? So Yitzchak felt terrible. So he does something which is unusual. He says, okay, I hear. So he composes himself. He says, okay. So he gives him a blessing. What's the blessing? That as long as Yaakov and his descendants, right, will observe the mitzvahs, right, they will have ascendancy over you. But if they sin, you will have ascendancy over them, and you can punish them, right? So what did he do? Why would a father do that, right? And have one child fight with the other guy, and not only that, but have one child persecute the other brother? And the answer is because what Yitzchak did is phenomenal. Because he said, listen, Yaakov Avinu and his descendants have to do the tikkun. That means the mitzvahs. But what happens if they don't do the tikkun? Then they have to atone for their sins. And atonement through yisurin, suffering, is a great way of doing tshuva. But who's going to persecute the Jews? Who's going to have the major job? So he gave that to Esav. There you are. He made Esav, you will be a great nation. And your fundamental job, right, is to persecute Yaakov and his descendants so they will do tshuva, you see, thereby making Esav part of the tikkun process. But it's sort of like an indirect way. You see? I mean, think about it. It was a brilliant stroke of genius, what Yitzchak did. That he made Esav, right, the cause of Yaakov's tshuva, you see? And of course we know the descendants of Esav, who they were, right? They were Edom. They were Rome, Christianity. And we know all the butchery and slaughter that Christianity and Rome has done to the Jewish people, the destruction of the temple. You see? But Yitzchak gave him that job. So he at least would have the merit of restoring Yaakov to do tshuva. You see? The problem is, what's the problem then? The problem is that their intent, or Esav's intent and his descendants, isn't to do the will of God. It's to benefit from the destruction of the Jewish people. And we see that from a whole Gemara in Avodah Zarah. You see? Where in the end of time, it's fascinating Gemara, Avodah Zarah. It says in the end of time, right, Edom, Esav, Rome, is going to come to God at the end of time in Judgment Day and say, we realize what we did, but, we did it because we wanted to help the Jews do the tikkun, which was Yitzchak's original intention. So God says to them, of course, what do you mean you wanted to help the Jews? Whatever you did was to benefit yourself, not the Jews. You see, you persecuted the Jews as much as you can. You built roads, and that's what they say. Well, we built roads, we did marketplaces. So God, that was all for yourself. But it's true what they did, that they did help the Jews because they did build civilizations, which would have helped the Jews. But their kavanah, their intent, was to destroy, and their intent was only to do it for themselves. Therefore, legitimately, they have no legal right to the future world. But the Gemara continues and says, God said, okay, since indirectly you did benefit my people, right, I will give you one chance, right? And I will give you one mitzvah called Sukkah, and let's see what you do. Anyway, they botched it. Without going into the whole Gemara, right, they botched it. And therefore, in many ways, they don't get the future world. But the main idea is that Esav said, I did it for the Jews, which was Yitzchak's original intention, to be part of the Tikkun process, you see. Although I do have to say that the Goyim, in certain sense, many of them do get the future world, right? Because they did indirectly help the Jews, especially if you're a Noahide, then you certainly get the future world and so on, you know. So, but there's another reason why. Because the Rambam says, Maimonides says, right, that when the Jews sinned and the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, then God gave the job of doing the tikkun, not tikkun itself, but to glorify and magnify His name. He gave it to the Goyim. And it's true. The Rambam says this. The Christians are the one that have talked about, you know, the Messiah, right? The Messiah, about believing in God, that there will be an end. Paganism doesn't deal with any of this. So they were assigned the task, you see, of promoting the honor of God. So for that they will be rewarded, you see. So in a certain sense, Yitzchak, of course, did accomplish in two ways. They have persecuted the Jews, even though it was for their own good, right? But also they have spread the honor of God with the New Testament, you know, because even though it's a terrible document, right, that badmouth, slanders, defames the Jews, it's terrible what that does. But in that sense, it also promotes God, even though it promotes somebody else, obviously. In any case, so that's what Yitzchak did. He gave Esav, again, the ability to be part of the Tikkun, but indirectly, you see? And that's what happened. So therefore, after he gave the blessings to Esav, so we now understand who Esav really is, you see. And as I will say later on, therefore Esav in the end does allow the Jews to do tshuva and so on. But in any case, so he gives the blessings to Esav, and that's what Yitzchak did. But now you really understand what Yitzchak was doing. It was incredible, a brilliant idea to save his son, you see. But the problem is, like I said, that's going to hang over the Jewish people. And that is the incredible observance of the mitzvah of Kibbud of Christianity, of Esav, of Edom. And we will see what the repercussions are later. But in any case, Yitzchak now comes back, and now he blesses Yaakov, because he now realizes the mistake that he made, you see. Now, what does all this mean? When he gives the blessings to Yaakov, right, what does all this mean? And the answer is a very important concept, and that is that there are 4 jobs to do. That's why there are 4 of us, patriarchs. So the problem is this, that Yaakov's job, right, was to bring down Kedusha, holiness. Esav's job was to fight the temptations of the Satan, right, and destroy the Satan, subdue him and destroy him, you see. The problem is if Esav, who is the 4th pillar, is now an incredible Rasha, and now does not have the power of Tikkun, certainly not directly, who is going to take over the job of Esav? Because somebody has to destroy the Satan, right? That's what it has to be. So what God did is amazing. What he did is he gave the job of Esav to Yaakov Avinu, you see. So Yaakov Avinu had to double up, piggyback. So not only did the Yaakov Avinu have the job of bringing down Kedusha, but he also had the job of subduing the evil of the Satan, by going into the field, he had to become the Ish Sodeh. You see? So that's what Yaakov did. He accepted the blessings which Yitzchak repeated to him, which meant that he now had the idea or the task of not only Mashiach ben David to bring down Kedusha, but also Mashiach ben Yosef. You see? And therefore, wait a minute. If you have the job of Esav, guess what? You can't stay home any longer and learn Torah, right? You need to go out into the Klippa. You need to go out into the world that is filled with sin. That is why Yaakov had to leave his home and go to Lavan, who was one of the arch enemies, who was one of the major, savants of evil. And now you understand, and that's what it says. The Torah alludes to that by saying, Vayetze Yaakov, right? Mi Beersheva, he left Beersheva. Vayelech Harana, and he went to Haran. So Rashi says, it should really say, right? And Yaakov went to Haran. We know he left, obviously, Beersheva, because that's where he was. Why is the Torah telling us that he left Beersheva, right? And he went to Haran? Because what the Torah is saying, and Rashi says this, right? That he left Beersheva to indicate that his reason for leaving Beersheva, right, is the reason why he had to go to Haran. You see? Because he became the Ish Sodeh. He now had to go into the field in the presence of evil and remain righteous. See? So the Torah is saying by this pasuk what the new job of Yaakov Avinu is. Until now, he had the job of what? Of bringing down Kedusha. Now his job was to subdue evil by remaining righteous. Even though he's in the house of Lavan, right, who's an evil person, he's also in Haran, which is the world and the evil of the world. This is his new job. So imagine Yaakov Avinu now has two jobs, right? So imagine having one of, and he's got two responsibilities, you see, and therefore he winds up going to Haran, the house of Lavan, you see. And now we understand what happened, why the pasuk says that he left Beersheva, because that's what caused him, because he received the blessings of Yitzchak, permanence of Mashiach ben Yosef, to go to Haran. You see? Like I say, it's amazing how the Torah alludes to everything by using the words that have that illusion. You see? So what does Yaakov now do? He goes, he's about to enter Haran, and he realizes, I could have gone to Har Maria, right? Where the Beis Hamikdash stood. I actually went away from that place. So all of a sudden, God made a miracle, and he returned him to Har Maria, right? And all of a sudden, he has the ladder, the dream of the ladder. What's the dream of the ladder? Angels going up and angels going down. You see, right? That's what he dreamt. And God promises that he's going to protect him and so on. Why would he see angels going up and angels going down? I mean, it's an incredibly prophetic vision. And the answer is because the angels were telling him, Yaakov, you have a new job. How? Because there's two ways of serving God. One is to bring holiness into the creation through Torah and mitzvahs. And therefore, those angels were going up the ladder. They were going up the ladder toward heaven, right? Because they wanted to bring holiness down by going up, doing the mitzvahs and Torah. But then there are angels going down, right? Why? Because in order to do the avodah, there are some people that must go into what's called the klipa. You got to go into the tumah, the pollution, the sinning, and remain righteous. See? That's why there are angels going up and angels going down. So they were telling Yaakov Avinu, by the way, you now have a new job. You now need to go into, down into the klipa, into the evil world. Ish Sodeh, man of the field, and subdue the Satan, because you now have the job of Esav, you see, because there has to be an Ov that does that job. And therefore, that's your tikkun for the next years. But one more idea, and then I will stop. Before Yaakov Avinu goes, he realizes, I've been learning Torah, right? The blessings were given to Yaakov when he was 63 years old. It's really getting into middle age, even past that. Yaakov Avinu, all the Torah I learned was only to increase holiness. But do I really have enough Torah to protect me against the machinations of the Yetzer Hara? Right? I got to protect myself. I have to learn the chokhmah of character development, where you are in the environment of evil. How to protect yourself. How to deal with the machinations of the Satan. You see? So what he did is amazing. He decided to go to the yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever before he went to Lavan. So he sat in that yeshiva for 14 years. Imagine? And it says that he didn't sleep. If he would be tired, he just put his head down and go to sleep. He did not sleep in a bed for 14 years. Because he had to learn the Torah, right, of the Satan. How to subdue, how to deal with the Satan. Imagine? So he goes to yeshiva for 14 years to learn the Torah of the Klippa, right? We don't even know what he learned there. It must have been tremendous Kabbalistic concepts and so on. But that's where he went. Because when you're about to enter the Klippa, when you're about to enter the world of work, sinning, unbelievable degradation, right, and debasement and so on, you have to be prepared. So that's what he did. He went to the yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever to prepare himself for descending into the filth, the pollution, the sinning that the world beckoned to him. You see, there you are. I'll stop here. But look at the story that you're listening to. On one level, the story is all about, two brothers fighting for the blessings of their father, and what happened, who got them, and so on. But really, on another level, which is the covert level, the hidden level, you're learning a whole different story. That the whole story, the story between Yaakov and Esav, right, and Yitzchak, and so on, is all about the spiritual task that they really have. And the continuity of that task, and what God does to make sure that they will do their tasks. You see, what you're really reading is a book about heaven, more than you're reading a book about the earth, even though it looks like you're reading an incredible, fascinating story. But you're really reading about heaven, because that's really what it's all about. People get involved in this world and they think, well, everything is money, it's business, and so on. This has nothing to do with eternal life. None of this. It's all about what is your mission, what is your spiritual mission, and how do you enhance that. That's what this world is all about. The tragedy is that mankind does not understand until it's too late. And not only that, not only do they not do a spiritual mission by remaining righteous, right, and holy and so on, what they do is they sin terribly, corrupt the world with their depravity and debasement and so on. What can you say? It's a terrible tragedy of what mankind does, So therefore, so far we're up to the Yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever, and Yaakov is about to a journey to Ish Sodeh, you see, a man of the field, to the house of Lavan, where he will be terribly tested. Any questions? Did you enjoy the story? Hello?
It's amazing.
Did everybody hear this?
Yep.
Yes, the whole thing.
Great. Okay. I hope you enjoyed the story and its real interpretation.
So I wanted to ask you.
Yes.
It's now that we're in the month of Kislev, does anything have to do with the fact that it always lands in this portion of the parasha? Always.
What always lands?
The Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the entering of the month of Kislev.
Kislev is a very holy month.
Right, and we just
because
ended off from
Messianic
Pesach.
month. Right.
Right. And Esav gave away the Messianic job, basically.
Yes, exactly. He lost it.
Right. So what does Kislev have in store for us with connection to this parasha always?
Well, Kislev is a very holy time. Why? As when I give the Hanukkah Shiur, you'll certainly understand, but Kislev is a restoration of a destroyed Beis HaMikdash in terms of the contamination of what the Greeks did. And you will see, Kislev is all about the restoration of the Messianic light, which I will elaborate on when I talk about Hanukkah. So therefore, Kislev is all about rededication and resurgence or renewal of the Messianic light. People do not realize that Hanukkah is all about the Mashiach. You see. Therefore, Kislev would be an incredible time to have a serious aspect of it for the Mashiach. You see.
Do you think that it's...
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah?
So if the yeshiva of Shem Va'eber was teaching the Torah of the Klippa, would that explain why Rivka went kind of in secret? She knew that that's one of the things that they taught there?
Well, that certainly could be, yes. Look, the yeshiva of Shem Va'ever wasn't the regular yeshiva. Because remember, the Torah was not given then. So we can ask, what in the world did they teach? Right? What were they teaching? What was the curriculum? Right? Of yeshiva Shem Va'ever, And obviously they had a curriculum where Yaakov Avinu could spend 14 years. Could you imagine going to yeshiva for 14 years? Obviously, they have to be able to address your needs. So we don't really know, you see, what they really taught. But what it has to be the traditions, the Kabbalistic traditions and so on, that was handed down by Adam Rishon. And that was handed down by Noach. Because they had, you see, the Torah doesn't talk much about the traditions, the knowledge that they had, you see. But they clearly a Sefer Razila Malach was given to Adam. The book that was written by an angel was given to Adam Rishon. I mean, Adam Rishon was phenomenal in terms of what he knew, you see. And what was denied him was just enough so he would be able to sin, you see. So they had the traditions of Adam and Noach, right? And Avram Avinu. So we don't really know their scholarship, their Torah. But it has to have been awesome if Yaakov went to that yeshiva. I mean, could you imagine Yaakov Avinu coming to your yeshiva? Right? I mean, incredible.
Right.
Because Yaakov Avinu already knew an incredible amount because his father was Yitzchak and his grandfather was Avram. So I'm sure he learned with them, right? That's why he was such an unbelievable person. The tragedy is that Esav had the same education and didn't benefit. So there's no question that they learned tremendously Kabbalistic concepts, which was handed down from Adam HaRishon. You see. And all of that will ultimately be revealed in the Messianic era. So don't be jealous of Yaakov Avinu. All of this will be revealed ultimately in the Messianic era. All this Kabbalistic information. And not only that, but the amount of Kabbalistic information that will be revealed, which is all about the inner workings of the spiritual world and the physical world, everything, is beyond belief, the amount. And all of that will be revealed in the Messianic era. That's one of the reasons why the Messianic era has to be a long time. Because it does take time to go through all this. So the Messianic era can't be 40 years. Right now, if the Mashiach came tomorrow, you still have 217 years to go to the end. Every minute is needed. Because there's so much Torah that the Mashiach will teach. You see? And I'm not even talking about Olam Haba, which is the future world, right? Where the knowledge is almost infinite. You see? So that's what it has to be.
So, I have a question. You know how they talk about the clothes of Esav that Yaakov wore? They say that it was the clothes really of Adam Harishon.
Right. Esav, by the way, the one who had the coat, right, which was Kabbalistic and so on, was Nimrod. And when Esav killed Nimrod on the day he came back to eat the pot of beans, lentils, right, he actually took the coat off Nimrod. So he had the coat, you see. And then eventually it went back to Yaakov, and then, of course, it went to Yosef and so on.
But what was the powers of this coat? I mean, is the coat that Hashem made Adam Harishon, but what was the powers of it? Besides the fact that the animals were able to come, and it was easier for him to kill the animals. I know that part.
Yeah.
So I'm saying Kabbalistic.
Well, look, I mean, I would imagine Kabbalistically, right, it exuded, right, incredible amount of divine energy. You see. So it wasn't just your average coat. The uniform, because remember, the coat basically was a uniform, right? A uniform has power because it symbolizes what you represent. So that coat represented tremendous amount of spiritual power, you see, and so on. And basically that's what it was. But that's what Esav wanted from Nimrod, you see.
Where the coat is buried? It's hidden right now?
We have no idea, just like we have no idea where the Oren is, the Ark. All of these things are buried, you see. Someday we'll know where they are, obviously.
But Mashiach doesn't need a coat, correct? It's not like it needs to pass down.
I can't hear you. What was that?
Mashiach, he's going to need that coat, or he's not going to need it?
I'm not familiar if, how that coat will serve the purposes of the Mashiach. But it will certainly be found or revealed or whatever with all the other gifts of the Beis HaMikdash. All the other incredible spiritual vessels of the Beis HaMikdash. Look, all of this will return to the Jewish people that we originally had. But when we went into the Golus, guess what? When you go into Golus exile, not only do you go into exile, right, but all the spiritual tools, they go with you into exile, you see? And that's why we don't know where they are. We don't know where the Ark is, the Menorah, all the vessels of the temple and so on. We don't know where they are. Why? Because that's the exile of the Kalim, of the vessels. It's not that they're hidden. They're in Golus. They also are in exile, just like us. Everybody goes into exile. Because what is subdued is not an individual entity. What is subdued is the whole concept of spirituality, being able to, illuminate and shine. So the Jews are in exile. The divine presence is in exile. Eretz Yisrael is in exile. The Kelim of the Beis HaMikdash, vessels, that's in exile. The coat's in exile. And the Ark is in exile. And Jerusalem is in exile. Everybody's in exile. Because the exile is not on any individual, it's on the whole concept of spirituality not being able to express itself, you see, and being subdued by satanic forces. That's what's in exile. You see, yeah. And I imagine one of the ways, by the way, of getting out of exile, because the one who keeps the Jews in exile is the prosecutions of the Satan, because he's always bringing up the sins. So therefore, what an interesting thought is, what happens if you can silence the Satan and he can't prosecute? Then all of this stuff would be released. That's the redemption. Well, how do you silence the Satan? And the answer is Shmiras HaLashon, Lashon Hara. Because if you don't talk Lashon Hara, right, then he cannot prosecute you. In fact, the Jews got out of Egypt because they did not speak Lashon Hara, you see. So therefore, if you want to silence the Satan, right, and bring the redemption, you need to not speak Lashon Hara. That's why. Because it is the prosecutions of the Satan that keeps everybody, and of course his prosecution is sinning, that keeps us in exile and everything with us. You understand what I'm saying? It's a very important concept. That the exile is because of the kitrugim, the satanic prosecutions. And we have a way, just like it was done in Egypt. If you don't speak Lashon Hara, then you silence him. In fact, like I once said, the Medrash says that the reason why the Jews got out of Egypt is because they did not speak Lashon Hara. Now, it doesn't say why, but it says that 3 different times in the Medrash. In fact, when the Jews were leaving Egypt, right, God says, or Moshe Rabbeinu says, stand back and watch the salvation of God, right? But only the atem tachrishon. You must be silent. So what Moshe was saying to them is, look, the reason why you're getting out is because you didn't talk Lashon Hara, so the Satan couldn't say, what do you mean, how can you let them out? They're only there 210 years. They were supposed to be there 400 years. So it was the prosecutions of the Satan that stopped them. So therefore, everybody stopped speaking Lashon Hara, and the Medrash doesn't say why, but that's how they got out, because there was no more prosecutions. And then all of a sudden, by the Yam Suf, right, the Dead Sea, not the Dead Sea, the Red Sea, all of a sudden, everybody's talking Lashon Hara. What? How could God do this to us? The Egyptians are going to kill us, right? That's Lashon Hara against God. So Moshe Rabbeinu had to tell him, cut it out. Because what you can do is, again, re-invoke the Ketrugim, the prosecutions of the Satan, and that will bring everybody to Egypt. Because that's what keeps us in Egypt, is the Lashon Hara that gives the power of the Satan to Mekatre. So what I'm telling you is everything is because of the prosecutions of the Satan. You don't realize how all-encompassing that is. So like I said, the exile of the Jew is the Jews, the Beis HaMikdash, the divine presence, the Kalim of the Beis HaMikdash, the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash, right, and the Ark. Everything is because of the Lashon Hara, you see. So therefore the answer is, you got to close his mouth. And the way you do that is Shmiras HaLashon.
It's crazy how Shmiras HaLashon has, Lashon Hara has such a big impact on our lives, yet so many people don't know that.
Right. That is, that's an incredible tragedy. People think, so I badmouth the guy, big deal, I slander, right? I mean, the world is filled with slander, filled with it, between newspapers, magazines, articles, right? And then the people, the neighbors, everybody's talking Lashon Hara about everybody else. But they don't realize that this is the key to the prosecutions of the Satan, which I give in my Lashon Hara share, the true power of speech, and so on. They don't realize the monumental effect of speaking Lashon Hara, you see, because it causes the heavenly tribunal to examine and to invoke a judicial proceeding It opens up the judicial process. People have no concept of how bad that is. You see, and if a person did not speak Lashon Hara, right, then it's incredibly difficult for the Satan to prosecute that person. And that's why it is such an incredible device to bring salvation to somebody that has tsaros, problems, tragedies, or whatever. And believe me, I'm not the only one saying this. Many Gedolim say, don't talk Lashon Hara, because then you will have a blessed and peaceful life. So you're right. People don't realize the enormous severity of slandering and defaming. Look, that's why the Chofetz Chaim spent so many of his years writing the book, Chofetz Chaim, giving shiurim on Shmiras HaLashon. You know, he's in a certain sense, the father of the laws of Lashon Hara. Before him, there was no real book that organized and collected all the laws in one volume. He did it because he realized that Lashon Hara is why the Mashiach doesn't come, why the Beis HaMikdash is not built, and why the Jews are in exile, and why the Jews are so persecuted by the nations of the world. They don't realize that, you see. And Lashon Hara is what destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash, right? That's what destroyed it. Could you imagine a sin that people look at askance, which means big deal? They don't realize that this is one of the most grievous sins in terms of its power, what it can do to everybody. And somebody who refrains from Lashon Hara, especially somebody who knows the laws of Lashon Hara, has an enormous advantage of escaping a great deal of travails of life. Anyway, you see.
How come it's like Hashem dimmed that light on the knowledge of it?
Didn't do what?
I feel like it's like, there's like a veil. People don't even see it. They don't hear it. They don't know of it. I feel like Hashem, is, it's not accessed as much. He's holding it back, all that. I mean, now more and more people are learning more about Lashon Hara, but for the most part...
actually, there are specific isurim, prohibitions, that are directed against Lashon Hara. But I imagine the real story is Miriam.
Yeah, of course.
So therefore, if somebody looks at Miriam and say, wait a minute, this is the sister of Moshe and Aaron. She was a prophetess. I mean, she was a Neviah. I mean, you can't get greater than a Neviah, right? And so on. So imagine being punished. She wasn't just punished. They had to wait for her for 7 days because God excommunicated her for 7 days. You have any idea what kind of punishment that is? She had to stand outside, right, the Jewish camp. It's incredible. For what? You'd think she committed murder or something like that. No. She badmouthed, in a certain sense, Moshe Rabbeinu. And she didn't do it, maliciously, because she felt for his wife, you see, who said that, well, my husband separated from me ever since he became a real prophet and so on, you see. So she committed a very light act of Lashon Hara, never intending to harm Moshe Rabbeinu. And she was a Neviah, one of the greatest of the Nevi'im. She's the one who sang Oz Yashir, right? I mean, you have any idea? She's the one who got all the Jewish women to sing Oz Yashir. So can we imagine? And the well was because of her merit. And when she died, what happened to the well? Dried up, right? Disappeared. So could you imagine the reason why Klal Yisrael can drink is because of this woman? What does that tell you about her stature? Unbelievable. And therefore she was so punished because she spoke Lashon Hara. I would imagine that story should send a tremble down everybody's spine. Because if God will not hesitate to punish Miriam, imagine what he'll do to you. And so on. And besides, the one who's very responsible for most people not knowing is the Satan. He doesn't want people to not to speak Lashon Hara. He needs their Lashon Hara in order to do what? In order to destroy the Jews, to get them to sin. You see? That's what he needs. You see? Anyway. Anything else?
You also revealed, like, the incredible mercy. You also revealed. Can you hear me?
Yes, say that again.
When you were saying that Hashem didn't tell Yaakov.
Yes.
Didn't tell Yitzchak.
Yitzchak, right.
And
what?
Like, didn't tell him, and when he had just realized that he gave the bracha to the wrong
right.
You revealed an incredible mercy that Hashem had to not want him to be, to see his grandson.
You mean his son? Yitzchak's son was Esav. To be such a sinner. Because that would have brought him tremendous grief. Look, Yitzchak loved Esav. I mean, the Torah says that. Yitzchak ohev Esav. And we're not talking about an average guy. We're talking about an unbelievable, refined person, character, tzaddik. I mean, he's one of the others, So he really loved his son. So as it is, he knew Esav would sin sometimes. But he figured, okay, listen, that's what happens when you fight the Yetzer Hara. He knew what Esav had. But he didn't know that Esav abandoned Judaism. He abandoned the whole spiritual journey of Avraham Avinu. He didn't know that. And maybe that's why Rivka never told him. Because the prophecy said, right, that he and Yaakov would never be equal. You see? Why? And the answer is because Esav would be an incredible sinner. You see? That's probably why she never told him. You see? And therefore he didn't really know the extent of the depravity, the evil of Esav. You see?
But don't you think that if he knew the prophecy that Rivka got when she was just pregnant with them, and she went to Shem and Eber and they told her what it meant, but she never relayed that to Yitzchak. If Yitzchak knew that, wouldn't he work extra harder to try to prevent that from happening, especially if he had the same job as him?
You're right. But you have to remember one thing. The people at Shem Ve'eva were telling her a prophecy that this must happen, even though Esav had free will. Now, we don't know what that means. In other words, they didn't take away the free will of Esav, but they did tell her what the future will hold. And that prophecy will come true. So it means that no matter what Yitzchak did, it wouldn't help. So he prays to God, right, that Esav should be a tzaddik. You see? Hey, look, you're not dealing with information or a crystal ball. You're dealing with nevuah, prophecy. You see?
Nevuah could change, though. We've learned that before.
Yes, but if it says that somebody's going to be a Russia, right, then that's God talking from his perspective.
Got it.
That's the problem. The nevuah was from God. You see? And it says, Lidreshes Hashem. Right? She went to inquire of God. That means she was inquiring of a nevuah from God. And he's saying this. So it didn't stop the free will, but God knows what you're going to choose freely, which is interesting. However that works. So had she told Yitzchak, and he would have failed in his ability to change Esav, can you imagine the grief he would have felt? So what she did is say nothing. Let happen what is happening, right? And hopefully Yitzchak will pray. Maybe Esav would have been much worse. Who knows? Had Yitzchak not prayed for him. Because I'm sure that's what he did. Still doesn't help. See? So that's why, probably why Rivka never told Yitzchak. So he was unaware of it. So God had to intercede and make sure, right, that Yitzchak is not going to give the permanence of Mashiach ben Yosef to Esav. which would have destroyed creation. You see?
So that was really the base of the blessing.
Right. Because if you look at those brachas, blessings, they are all material. They concern themselves with this world. They are not spiritual. Take a look at those blessings. And the one who needs those blessings is Mashiach ben Yosef, so he can subdue the evil of the planet. That's why, you see? Because people have noted, how come the blessings are not spiritual? You see? They're all physical. You see? And that's why. I mean, you can imagine that's what Esav was. I mean, he was a forerunner to the avodah, to the work of Mashiach ben Yosef. He was no ordinary person.
So was Yaakov Mashiach ben David?
Well, he had the avodah ben David, correct? Yes. Which is called his Pashas Kedusha, the proliferation or expansion of holiness. And that's ben David, right?
So once he took on the blessing, he took on both jobs?
Right. That's what happened, which is what I talked about. He took on both jobs. Because you need a fourth of. Because somebody has to do the job of going out into the evil. I pointed the difference between Yitzchak and Esav. And therefore God had to give it, it's called a contingency plan. So he gave it to Yaakov. But the fascinating aspect, as we will see in the continuation of the story, is what did Yaakov do? Can a person really do two jobs? Because they require different characteristics. And we're going to talk about that. How this concept of what Yaakov did with the second job, how it changes the whole Bereshis. You see, which you'll understand. It answers so many questions because this is the real story. It's a story in heaven more than it is a story on earth. And you should know one thing. That is everybody's story. We don't realize our real story is in heaven. Who we are, what our mission is, what our aspect of creation that we have to do the tikkun for, you see, and what our reward will be. This is all heaven. This is Olam Haba. Except we have to go through the motions in this world. But think about it. If you compare Olam Haba, which is eternal, which means never ending, to Olam Hazeh, which is not more than 6,000 years, I ask you, which one seems more important? Right? He talk about a time that the world, that existence will never end. That we cannot even imagine what it means it will never end. Right? It's eternal. It never ends. That means after 400 billion years, right, to go, after the world, Olam Haba passes 400 billion years, that's a drop in the bucket because it never ends. So even 400 billion years is nothing. So I ask you, if that's the case, so which is the significant, what is more important? What happens in heaven to order everything, and to arrange everything, or what we think happens on earth? You know, the guy invested in the stock market. Who cares? That market is only as long as you're alive, the wealth of that stock or whatever. It's what you do with the money. People make such a tremendous mistake. They don't realize, you only have one lifetime to do this, to gain an eternity. And how long is all this money and wealth going to do you? You see? That's the tragedy, is that we look at this world as the only world. But when you compare it to the future world, which is eternal, never-ending. So, of course, the main actions is what happens in heaven. You see? So this world is really a cloak for the real world of Olam Haba. And what I'm trying to show you is this whole story is all spiritual. That happened to talk about two people. But it's all spiritual. But the tikkun process, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef, to subdue and destroy the Satan. You see? And then all about the blessings and man's choice. These are all issues of heaven, really. But the beauty is, and the astonishing concept, is how God hides everything. And in one or two words, he can reveal the real story with only one word. Like Kayoim, as this day. You see? Well, why would he write? And Esav despised the birthright. Because he had to show why Yaakov did this. It wasn't because Yaakov was interested in money. But God does it in such an incredibly elegant and subtle way. The problem is we got to figure this out. You see? But when you do figure it out, it will give you unbelievable pleasure that you actually know what the Chumash is alluding to, at least on a certain level. You see? What can I tell you? To know the real story of Bereshis and the whole Chumash will give you an unbelievable pleasure to know the real deal, as they say.